Chocolate began as a bitter drink, so precious that people once used its beans as money, so sacred that only kings and warriors were allowed to drink it, and so easy to fake that ancient marketplaces had to hunt down counterfeiters selling beans made of wax and mud. The world's most famous chocolate legend claims a Spanish conquistador carried it home as a treasure, and that story turns out to be almost completely wrong. A quiet accident inside a 19th century factory, left running by mistake over a single weekend, quietly built one of the most valuable food companies on Earth. And the sweet bar in your pocket today is only a few generations old, sweetened, softened, and reinvented so many times that it would be unrecognizable to the people who first discovered it. This is the real story of chocolate, 4,000 years in the making. For most of the 20th century, historians assume chocolate began in Mexico with the Olmec and Maya civilizations. Then, in 2018, archaeologists studying pottery from a site called Santa Ana La Florida in southeastern Ecuador found something that rewrote the story completely. Chemical traces of theobromine, the same compound found in every bar of chocolate today, were left inside ceramic vessels used by the Mayo Chinchipe people roughly 5,300 years ago. That makes cacao's story begin not in Mexico, but deep in the Amazon of South America, more than 1,000 years before it ever reached the civilizations we usually credit. From there, traders and travelers carried cacao trees northward, and by around 1900 BC, communities on the Pacific coast of what is now Mexico were already drinking it. Those early Mexican vessels belonged to the Macaya people, and residue found inside them shows they were already fermenting and drinking cacao by around 1900 BC. A few centuries later, the Olmec, one of Mesoamerica's earliest complex societies, were using cacao at their capital of San Lorenzo. Nobody knows exactly how cacao was prepared in this era, but the pattern is already familiar. Cacao pulp and beans, fermented and ground, turned into a ritual drink rather than a simple snack. The very word cacao may confirm the Olmec connection. Linguists have traced it not to Nahuatl, but to an older Mixi-Zoque language family once spoken in the Olmec heartland, suggesting the Olmec were the ones who first gave cacao its name. By the time the Maya rose to prominence, cacao was no longer just a local curiosity. It had become something closer to a sacrament. The Maya called their drink something close to chocolate, and for centuries, dictionaries claimed the name meant bitter water in the Nahuatl language spoken later by the Aztecs. Modern linguists studying Nahuatl texts have challenged that translation. The word ixocolit, bitter water, never actually appears in any surviving Aztec writing. Researchers Karen Dakin and Soren Wichmann instead traced the name tequiolatl from a word for the beater stick used to whip the drink into foam, not from a word for bitter at all. So the name that gave us the English word chocolate may have been built on a 500-year-old mistranslation nobody caught until recently. Whatever the true meaning of its name, the drink itself was bitter in taste, roasted cacao beans ground into a paste, mixed with water and blended with chili peppers, vanilla, and local spices. Mayan nobles poured the mixture back and forth between two vessels from a height again and again until a thick foam rose to the top. That foam, not the liquid beneath it, was considered the finest part of the drink, and vessels made specifically for chocolate have been found buried inside royal Maya tombs. Cacao appears in Maya religious ceremonies, marriage rites, and even before battles, drunk by rulers who believed it connected them directly to the gods. It was less a beverage than a form of prayer you could taste. When the Aztec Empire rose to power in central Mexico, cacao became something the Maya had never quite made it, real money. Cacao beans were counted out like coins across Aztec markets. A single bean could buy a tomato, 3 beans an avocado, and around 100 beans covered a porter's wages for an entire day. The value was so reliable that a 16th century Spanish friar named Bernardino de Sahagún recorded a very human side effect. Dishonest sellers were caught molding fake cacao beans out of amaranth dough, wax, and even avocado pits. Market officials in the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan had to inspect bean shipments the way a modern bank inspects currency forgeries. Only nobles, warriors, and long-distance merchants were normally permitted to drink actual chocolate since ordinary cacao was too valuable to casually swallow. The Emperor Moctezuma II was said to drink dozens of cups a day, served in pure gold vessels, according to the Spanish soldier Bernal Diaz, who witnessed it firsthand. For Moctezuma, chocolate was not comfort food. It was a visible display of imperial wealth. In 1519, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés arrived at Moctezuma's court and watched this golden ritual with his own eyes. For centuries afterward, popular legend credited Cortés with personally carrying chocolate back to Spain as a treasure of conquest. Historians who have searched the archives found no such record. Cortés described cacao in his letters home, but there is no evidence he ever shipped any beans to Europe himself. The real story is quieter and involves no conquistador at all. In 1544, a delegation of Quechua Maya nobles traveled to Spain with Dominican friars and presented chocolate to the Spanish royal court. It took another 4 decades before the first official cargo of cacao beans was recorded arriving in Europe in 1585. So the man remembered for bringing chocolate to Europe almost certainly did not, and the people who actually did have mostly been forgotten. Once in Spain, chocolate faced one big problem. Europeans hated the taste. Bitter, spicy, and strange, the original drink did not suit European palates at all. According to Spanish monastery tradition, monks at the Piedra Monastery in Aragon experimented with the recipe brought back from the Americas and started adding sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla instead of chili. That single change, replacing chili with sugar, transformed a bitter ceremonial drink into something closer to dessert. The sweetened version spread quietly through Spanish convents and noble households, most of them keeping the recipe as a closely guarded secret. For almost a century, Spain managed to keep chocolate largely to itself before the rest of Europe ever got a proper taste. Early European doctors did not treat chocolate as a treat at all. Pharmacists and physicians sold it as a prescribed medicine with recommended doses just like any other drug. In 1631, the Spanish physician Antonio Colmenero de Ledesma wrote that chocolate could clean the teeth, sweeten the breath, cure kidney stones, and protect against poison and disease. That medicinal reputation helped chocolate slip quietly into respectable European society, sold in pharmacies decades before it ever appeared in a candy shop window. Eventually, the secret leaked out through royal marriages and diplomacy, and chocolate spread to the courts of France and Italy as an expensive luxury drink. By the 1650s, sweetened chocolate had reached London, where it quickly became fashionable among the wealthy, much like coffee did around the very same time. In 1693, an Italian immigrant named Francesco Bianco, who went by Francis White, opened White's Chocolate House on St. James's Street. It soon became the meeting place for the richest and most powerful men in London, eventually turning into one of England's oldest private clubs. A rival chocolate house called the Cocoa Tree opened nearby around 1698 and became a hub for political plotting rather than idle gossip. King Charles II was so nervous about these chocolate and coffee houses breeding conspiracy that in 1675 he tried, briefly and unsuccessfully, to shut every one of them down. As chocolate's popularity grew across Europe, scientists finally gave the plant behind it a proper name. In 1753, the Swedish botanist Carl Linnaeus classified the cacao tree and named its genus Theobroma, Greek for food of the gods. It was, in a way, Europe finally agreeing with what Maya and Aztec priests had believed for thousands of years. For nearly 3 centuries after Cortez first saw it, chocolate remained almost exclusively something you drank, thick and greasy with natural cocoa butter. That changed in 1828 when a Dutch chemist named Coenraad van Houten patented a hydraulic press that could squeeze most of the fatty cocoa butter out of roasted beans. The leftover dry cake could then be ground into a fine, much less greasy cocoa powder, easy to mix into water or milk. Van Houten also treated the powder with alkaline salts to soften its harsh flavor, a technique still called Dutch processing today. For the first time, chocolate makers had 2 separate ingredients to work with: cocoa powder and pure cocoa butter. And that separation would make solid chocolate possible. In 1847, the British company J.S. Fry & Sons, already famous for drinking chocolate since the 1760s, finally solved the puzzle of eating chocolate. By taking Van Houten's separated cocoa butter and blending it back into a paste of cocoa powder and sugar, Fry & Sons created a mixture that could be poured into a mold and set solid. They called it chocolat délicieux, a manger, delicious chocolate to eat, widely considered the first mass-produced solid chocolate bar in history. For roughly 200 years, chocolate had been something people sipped. In a single decade, it became something people could simply bite. Around the same period, a Quaker shopkeeper named John Cadbury had already spent 2 decades quietly building his own chocolate business in Birmingham, 1 cup and 1 bar at a time. In 1866, his sons Richard and George Cadbury adopted their own version of the Dutch cocoa press, producing a purer cocoa essence that finally competed with continental European chocolate. Quaker business owners of this era were barred from universities and the military under British law, so the Cadbury family poured their ambition into commerce and social reform instead. Nearly 40 years later, in 1905, the Cadbury Company launched Dairy Milk, a bar formulated with more liquid milk than any of its European rivals. Dairy Milk became the company's best-selling product within a decade, and the same name is still on chocolate bars sold around the world today. Solid chocolate had a stubborn problem left to solve. Nobody had figured out how to add milk without the mixture turning lumpy or spoiling. A Swiss chocolate maker named Daniel Peter had been struggling with exactly that problem for years, watching batch after batch spoil. The unexpected solution came from his neighbor, a chemist named Henri Nestle, who had recently invented a condensed milk formula to feed infants who could not be breastfed, including Peter's own daughter. In 1875, Peter finally combined that condensed milk with cocoa mass, cocoa butter, and sugar, and produced the world's first true milk chocolate. In 1879, Peter and Nestle formally joined forces, and the company built from that partnership still bears Nestle's name today. A technical failure at a milk formula for babies had accidentally become the foundation of an entirely new category of chocolate. Nestle would add one more twist to the story 6 decades later. In 1936, the same company launched the first widely sold white chocolate, made only from cocoa butter, sugar, and milk, with no cocoa solids at all. That same year, in the Swiss city of Bern, a 24-year-old chocolate maker named Rodolphe Lind made a discovery almost by accident. Before Lind's discovery, chocolate had a rough, grainy texture that stayed slightly gritty on the tongue no matter how finely the beans were ground. Lind left a mixing machine running over an entire weekend, either by mistake or simple neglect, and returned to find the chocolate paste inside had transformed completely. The long, slow stirring had smoothed the mixture into something silky and fluid, melting on the tongue instead of crumbling. A process Lind named conching after the shell-shaped trough his machine used. He kept the technique a closely guarded secret for 20 years before finally selling the rights to the Sprungli family for 1.5 million gold francs. Almost every smooth, melt-in-the-mouth chocolate bar made since then owes its texture to that one accidental weekend. Milk chocolate was now possible, but it was still a slow, expensive European luxury made in small batches using imported, condensed milk. An American candy maker named Milton Hershey saw German and Swiss chocolate-making machinery on display at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair and decided to solve the cost problem himself. Instead of using condensed milk like the Swiss, Hershey developed his own process using fresh Pennsylvania milk after years of frustrating experiments with milk that kept souring. By 1900, he had built an efficient factory, run on the same industrial principles used in modern assembly lines, that could produce milk chocolate bars cheaply enough for ordinary working people to buy. The business grew so quickly that Hershey built an entire company town around his factory in Pennsylvania, and its population multiplied more than tenfold within a single decade. For the first time in chocolate's 4,000-year history, a food once reserved for kings and priests had become something almost anyone could afford. Hershey's factory reached its largest scale not selling candy bars but supplying the United States military during the Second World War. In 1937, Army officials asked Hershey to design a survival ration bar with an oddly specific brief: high in energy, able to withstand heat, and taste just a little better than a boiled potato. The result, nicknamed the D ration, was deliberately made dense and slightly bitter so hungry soldiers would not eat it as a casual snack and run out during an emergency. Troops hated it so much they nicknamed it Hitler's secret weapon, and by the war's end, Hershey's factory was producing an estimated 24 million bars a week. It remains one of the strangest achievements in chocolate's history, a bar engineered, on purpose, to not taste very good. Chocolate's next chapter is not about invention, it is about where the cacao actually comes from today and who grows it. Roughly 70% of the world's cacao now comes from just 2 West African countries, Ivory Coast and Ghana, a dramatic shift from cacao's Latin American origins. Many of the farmers growing that cacao live on less than $1 a day, even as global chocolate sales reach well over $100 billion a year. Investigations over the past 2 decades have repeatedly found children, some as young as 5, working on West African cocoa farms instead of attending school. Major chocolate companies have repeatedly pledged to end child labor in their supply chains, and independent researchers have repeatedly found those pledges only partly kept. In response, fair trade and direct trade certification programs now try to guarantee cacao farmers a fairer, more stable price for their harvest. At the same time, a small but growing bean-to-bar movement has started buying cacao directly from small farms in Latin America, the same region where this story began, paying a premium for rare heirloom cacao varieties. The debate is far from settled, but a growing number of chocolate makers now print exactly which farm, and sometimes which farmer, their cacao came from. So the next time you unwrap a chocolate bar, remember everything actually folded inside it. A South American ritual drink older than Mexico's own great civilizations, cacao beans once so valuable that people faked them out of wax and mud, and an emperor who drank from cups of pure gold. A conquistador wrongly given credit for bringing it to Europe, monks who quietly made it sweet, and an accidental weekend at a mixing machine that gave the world its smoothest bite. 4,000 years after it began as bitter water sipped by priests and kings, chocolate is still, in its own way, the food of the gods.